everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and welcome to the recap for the November 2018 ChemKnitsDyeAlong. This month I thought we should look beyond the sky at the galaxy, at the Milky Way, and use this beautiful ombre picture where you've got pinks, purples, and blues with white speckles. So clearly upon seeing this, I knew that I wanted to play around with breaking purple dyes and do some resist technique to try to leave some white speckles behind. Credit for this amazing photo belongs to Ferenc Horvath via the site Unsplash. In this recap, I am going to go through the yarns that I dyed in a previous live stream of my inspiration and my sort of idea on how to dye yarn inspired by this photo. In addition to that, I am going to share some photos of some of the yarn that you created and your interpretation of these colors. When participating in the ChemKnitsDyeAlong, you don't have to take the picture literally. You can draw from one aspect, you can draw some colors, you can draw technique. Ultimately, I want to know what it is about the photo that inspired you to go and play with color. In my live stream, I mixed 3 different purple blurple shades using the Wilton Colorite food coloring system. I used 3 different yarn bases, Knit Picks Swish, which is DK weight 100% superwash merino, Bulky Chroma Twist, which is 70% superwash wool, 30% nylon, and then Biggo, which is 50% superwash merino, 50% nylon. I guess not all of the yarn is bulky. 2 of the yarns are bulky, but on these different bases, I did use 3 different techniques to apply resist. While the colors that I mixed were not identical, there are clearly similarities you see here. In all of them, we see a really, really deep eggplant purple and a bright blue. But I think that it is interesting, and I will share, once they're dry, the formulas that I used for each of them when I was mixing. But in each case, it was around 30 drops of food coloring to give us these really deep saturated colors. I wanted to look at 3 different ways to tie up the yarn to create resist points. And while it's not a totally even comparison, because I used slightly different dye formulas and different yarn bases, hopefully we will learn something about what we might want to try in the future. On the Swish DK yarn, I added some removable nylon zip ties, and you can very clearly see where I had them around the yarn, either going around just the skein as a whole or going around both sides together. And in the places where I had it tight enough, we have either a pastel blue or maybe in the very center some hints of white. Whatever the color is, it is certainly significantly less saturated than the rest of the yarn. One of the ties, not on purpose, but ended up being a bit paler or like not as tight as the rest. And even there we do have resist marks. They're just not as bright as the other ones. These resist points are repeating on this yarn. It is a repeating colorway as a whole, and I do think that they are fun, and knit up could give the finished project sort of a look with little stars on the backdrop, depending on how they line up. However, I also wanted to investigate some other methods of applying resist before we dip dyed the yarn. In each case, I mixed the food coloring in half a cup of water and then added it to the dye pot, which had 8 cups of water, 1 tablespoon of white vinegar, and I mixed the acid with the dye immediately before we started dip dyeing the yarn. And all the yarn was pre-soaked for about 20 minutes in plain tap water. All of the yarns that I used in my live stream are superwash, and so therefore I knew that they would absorb color quickly, which was sort of setting us up for success in terms of resist points. If you're using yarn that absorbs color sort of slowly, then some of these resists might not work as well because some of that dye can sort of work its way through. On the Chroma Twist, I took some 100% acrylic yarn and then tied some super tight butterfly ties throughout it. I particularly chose a bulky yarn so that way I could go through fewer strands at a time. But in addition to these more butterflies, I did pick a point in the middle where I just wrapped a bunch of yarn around it. And I sort of tried to go through at different angles and pull yarn out so the spacing wasn't perfectly even. So that way it would make it slightly more randomized and maybe a little slightly less repeating. The zip ties took almost no time to put on and take off. This took longer. But using sort of this thicker yarn and only doing half the skein, it still didn't take that much time. But I sort of wanted to do grips at smaller sections versus the zip tie which sort of gripped the entire skein at once to see if we could get some smaller close to white patches. But now I'm going to go remove all these zip ties using some sharp scissors. This is so amazing and I cannot wait to see this yarn dry. These tight little wraps gave us these bright, again, maybe not totally white, but definitely pastel and bright color compared to the saturated jewel tones on the rest of the yarn. And with the acrylic yarn, they're actually fairly teeny. I mean, that's less than a whole stitch. The area that we wrapped has a really nice galaxy feel too. I think that wrapping a whole skein of yarn like that could be really fun. I've only really ever did one segment, but I sort of like the feel that that brings in. And clearly both of these are techniques that I will need to explore more in the future. But again, it took a reasonable amount of time. And so ultimately with all of these techniques, it comes down to whether or not you feel like it is worth your time. Because if it's worth your time and you enjoy doing it in the process, then it's totally worth it. Finally, here is the Biggo yarn that started off as Dud of Heather versus Bear. And I don't know if the colors are overall a little more muted because of the gray base or because I did a slightly different kind of mixture of the food colorings. But I do need to go and clip off these ties. Now the crochet thread is significantly thinner than the acrylic ties that we had used before. So I was able to get tighter, but this also took a lot longer. A lot longer than the first one. And so, you know, if we turn out and we get something that looks like true speckles, that's going to be awesome. But I don't know if it's really worth the amount of time I put in. And again, it depends on what it is worth it to you. So I'm going to clip off these ties and we'll see if we see anything. This took way less time to take off than it did to put on. And ooh, did this work. We've got subtle little stars here. It looks awesome. I don't know for sure if the reason why they're looking like not super vibrant is because we started with the gray base, or if some more color was able to get through or get close because like the resist wasn't taking up very wide of an area. So this is one reason why, even though I did 3 colorways and 3 different techniques, it's not a true comparison because I didn't use the exact same dyes and the exact same bases, which would have been a little more fair for a comparison. Now that the yarn has all been de-prepped and unwound from the resists that I had put on, I need to go wash the yarn and then hang it up to dry. And once the yarn is dry, we'll come back and really compare the 3 of them to each other because it's a better comparison once they're no longer wet. Of all of the techniques that I did for this video, I think that the middle one nailed my inspiration the best. I love these big white reverse speckles that we got on this bulky Chroma Twist yarn base. They really do look like stars against these galactic colors. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy these other 2 as well. And I think in terms of color, these purples and blues might be my favorite on the Swish, but that doesn't mean I don't love the other ones just as much. The colors that we mixed were as follows. With the first one, we used 9 drops of black, 12 drops of pink, and 10 drops of blue food coloring from the Color Right system. In the second one, we used 26 drops of blue, 8 drops of red, and 4 drops of pink. And then finally, on the Heather Gray Biggo yarn base, we used 10 drops of crimson and 10 drops of blue. Each of these had similar numbers of dye drops, and they're all broken purple colorways. But ultimately, there are some differences in these hues, and you can achieve different levels of purple using the Wilton Color Right system. If you would like to learn more about any of the yarn bases that we used, Swish DK, Bulky, Chroma Twist, and Biggo, you can find links in the video description to the Knit Picks yarn and also the Wilton Color Right food coloring system. I know I mentioned this earlier in the recap, but I'm not sure if our cotton thread speckles are a little less sharp and vibrant than the ones where we used the worsted weight acrylic yarn because the thread was thinner, or if it's because the yarn base is a pale gray versus a white. Either way, I think technique-wise, it was a lot more comfortable to use the thicker yarn, and I think that these speckles are really similarly sized. But I just love how in all 3 of the cases, these speckle points give us these bright pastel, either white or gray, surrounded by a little blue halo before going back into the reds. And this is just so exciting to me because the resist point was a little bigger and the reds struck quickly and weren't able to get to that center point. So I just think that that's an extra bonus from this technique. I'm zoomed in, so you can really see that blue surrounding those white points. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I hope that you had as much fun with the ChemKnitsDyeAlong as I have. Stay tuned because on the 15th of December, I will launch this month's Dye-Along inspiration. What do we think it's going to be? These 3 skeins are so beautiful, and they're similar but have some differences. And ultimately, this is all based on my interpretation of the Dye-Along image. But now I want to take a closer look at your inspiration and see what from this picture grabbed your attention. Some of you twisted and painted blanks to create stunning gradients reminiscent of the sky. Others of you dip-dyed yarn to create broken gradients using food coloring, acid dyes, and so many types of dyes. And some of you also played with resist points, or maybe went and did speckles in these colors. No matter what, the inspiration that you draw from the photo is your own. And thank you so much for sharing all of your pictures with me. I really wish that I could feature every single photo that was submitted. And I'm sorry if you didn't see yours in this video today. However, try again next month and I might pick your photo to include in the Dye-Along recap. If you would like to see more of the yarn that was dyed, check out the hashtag ChemKnitsDyeAlong on Instagram, or find the Facebook thread featuring the November ChemKnitsDyeAlong on my Facebook page. Make sure that you are subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and tap that bell icon so that way you can turn on notifications, and this way you won't miss a live stream because these dye-alongs are just so much fun. And in addition to these live streams, I also publish at least 2 new yarn dyeing videos every single week. If you love ChemKnits and love the yarn I dye and want to bring some of it home, I do have an Etsy store, and my shop is filled with hand-dyed yarn dyed in past and upcoming YouTube videos. You can find a link to the shop in the video description and iCard. Thank you so much for watching.